there, for today's video, we will be going over fantasy. Fantasy is a type of genre. Genres are a kind or type of story, okay? We've gone over several different types of genres throughout first grade. We've gone over poetry, realistic fiction, biographies, fiction, folk tales, nonfiction, and today we're going to be talking about fantasy. Go ahead and say that word with me. Fantasy. Excellent job. So just by looking at this picture just by looking at this picture right here, what do you think a fantasy is? I'll give you some time to think about it. All right, a fantasy is a type of story that is made up, has made up events that could not really happen, okay? Let's go ahead and look at the different elements of a fantasy. We have characters, setting, events. I'm going to go ahead and read them to you. Characters, not found in real life. They do amazing things. Animals talk and act like people. Then you have the setting. Remember, setting is where and when a story takes place. So where and when the story takes place is unusual. Unusual meaning it's not really something you would see every day. It may not be in today's world, okay? And then events could not happen in real life. Problem is usually solved in an unusual way. It's make-believe. Remember, when you think of fantasy, you think of your imagination, okay? Let's go ahead and look at the elements a little bit closer. So what are the elements of fantasy? Well, it is fiction. Fiction meaning it is fake, it's not real. Characters have magical powers. Sometimes, not all the time, but in fantasy, you're going to see a lot of characters that do have magical powers. The plot, remember plot is the different events that happen throughout the story, is usually a fight between good versus evil. And then their imaginary creatures exist. So here's a witch on a broom. Here is a castle in the clouds with a waterfall coming down. And then right here is just an example of different little things that you would find in a fantasy. So let's talk about characters. So characters have special or magical powers. Not all the time, but a lot of times in fantasies you'll see that. Animals behave like humans. So right here, dragons love tacos. This is a good example of a fantasy story. One, dragons don't exist. Two, if they did, I don't think they'd be eating tacos. And right here you have some talking crowns holding up signs. So these are not even animals. These are creatures that come to life. You're not going to have markers or crowns coming to life. That is just not going to happen. And then in this one right here, you have talking cows that can type. That cannot happen, right? Okay, setting. Setting takes place in another world or universe. This doesn't always happen, but for the most part, you might see a different universe because it's not going to happen. Any of the things that are happening would not happen in today's world. Traveling through time can happen. In the story, the Magic School Bus, they travel through time. They do a lot of different things that just would not happen in today's world. It takes place in a fantasy land. So again, that doesn't always happen, but sometimes it does. For example, The Wizard of Oz. That's a fantasy land, okay? And then right here is the Magic School Bus. If you've ever heard that story, give me a thumbs up. Heard, read that story, thumbs up. Okay, right here, they're actually underwater. That's not going to happen, right? In today's world, no. So the setting is unusual. For example, it's in a fantasy land or underwater or in Jack and the Beanstalk. If you remember, Jack climbs up the beanstalk and goes to a castle in the sky. It's in clouds. That's not going to happen. That is not a real setting, right? Okay, so now let's talk about plot. Plot are the events that happen in a story, right? So we have the events that happen in the beginning of the story, the middle of the story, and the end, right? Just like a normal story, there's different events that happen, okay? But in a fantasy story, the events that happen are not possible or realistic. Let's go back to the story, Jack and the Beanstalk. Well, he gets magical beans in the beginning of the story, right? That's not going to happen. The beans fall and get water on them, and they grow into a huge, gigantic beanstalk. That's not going to happen. There's giants, there's magical things that are happening, right? That's not going to happen, right? The different things that happen throughout that story, not possible. They're not realistic, okay? All right, so that's fantasy. Fantasies are stories that are made up with made-up events that could not really happen. I hope you enjoyed this little review over fantasy.